Good morning. I'm RJ Shelly, the County Extension Agent for Coastal and Marine Resources in Calhoun County. And this morning, we're going to take a look at what I think is one of the most unique marsh areas along the shorelines of Matagorda Bay. Let's go take a look. These marsh areas are some of the most productive areas along the Texas coast. These are the nursery areas. This is where all the shrimp, fish, crabs start their life. In addition to being nurseries for the fish, shrimp, and crabs in the bay, these areas also provide habitat for birds, small mammals, and numerous species of aquatic plants. These marsh areas are also important to filter the water that's running off the land. They are also our first defense between the areas that we live in and the water when a tropical storm or hurricane is coming in. The vegetation in these areas slows down the wave action before it hits homes. One of the things that makes this marsh so special is that within a matter of 10 yards, you go from lowland marsh and you pick up about 10 foot of elevation, and you get a whole different species of plants. In addition to that, elevation helps to protect the land behind this point from storm surge. Here's even another habitat in this area. This is the back side of the point that we were on earlier. The front side facing Matagorda Bay has a marsh, and the back side of the point facing Karankawa Bay, which is what you're looking at right now, has a hard, crushed shell beach that falls off a little bit deeper. If I stepped out there about 10 yards, it would be over the top of these waders. That's another type of habitat that's used by different species of fish and shrimp. Another thing that makes this area special is we're on the north shore of Matagorda Bay. There's not many areas along the north shore of Matagorda Bay that have cordgrass marshes. Most of the areas along the north shore are just sand beaches because the southeast wind comes straight in from out there, and that predominant wind is usually not beneficial for cordgrass growth, but it has made it in this area. We're right along the transition between the normally wet areas and the dry areas. My right foot is in the water and my left foot is on dry land. Just take a look at how many different colors you see in this picture. Each one of those colors is a different species of vegetation. That's what makes this area so important and such beneficial wildlife and fisheries habitat. Now we've moved up about maybe 1.5 feet or 2 in elevation. And as you can see, some of the species of vegetation have changed, and the density at which the vegetation grows is a little different. All of these factors help to make this such a diverse and important area for wildlife. This area has one of the most diverse bird populations in all of Calhoun County. In the low areas behind me, you get all of the birds that like to live, feed in around the water. Right here, we're on top of the ridge, and as you can see, several different species of vegetation that you didn't see down in the marsh. In addition to that, notice how this ridge falls off down to the area where the water is. This provides a tremendous buffer to storm surge during hurricane season. This area behind me has a pretty diverse population of native brush and plants, and it's a couple feet higher in elevation. This is one of the first areas that the neotropical birds that fly across the Gulf of Mexico from the Yucatan Peninsula will stop to rest. This is one of the upland areas that I was telling you that the neotropical birds fall out. In addition to different species of vegetation, notice how the vegetation is in different layers. Each one of those layers provides the habitat that different species may use. That's what makes this so important. When you get down to the marsh areas on the southern end of Matagorda Bay, closer to the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of the marsh areas have quite a bit of mangroves in them. They're starting to come into this area, but not as much as you have when you're closer to the Gulf of Mexico. Got my co-star here this morning. I don't know if you can see behind me, but if you see, we've moved a little bit further west down the marsh, and we are starting to see a few mangroves in there. They mix in with the cordgrass and provide yet another type of habitat out in that marsh area for fish and shrimp. These are the mangroves right back here. They've got a pretty complex root system that actually pops up above the bottom of the bay so that the roots can get air. And those additional roots provide a whole lot of habitat for fish, shrimp, crabs, and other invertebrates that use the marsh. We've already discussed why this area is so important. The landowner noticed that he was losing a lot of marsh over the years, especially after Hurricane Claudette came through and changed up the hydrology of the area. So they wanted to try to preserve this because they knew how important this habitat was to the state of Texas. I don't know if you can see behind me, but there's some channel markers out there, and they're marking a rock breakwater. This is part of the Schicke Point Living Shoreline project. This area was studied. They did hydrology testing, they did flow testing, they looked at sediment types, and then they compiled the data and they installed the rock breakwater out there. And the goal was to get sand to deposit behind the breakwater, protect the marsh, and hopefully get some sediment from the bay to come in and start building some more land right here so that we could have some additional marsh habitat since it's so rare. The project was completed in 2017, a few months before Hurricane Harvey, and so far it appears that it's working. This is one of the more open water areas inside the marsh. This is way up inside the marsh. Wouldn't it be neat to see what the bottom looks like? Well, we can. Because in Texas, we have relatively shallow bays and we have a relatively small tidal influence on them. 12 to 18 inches is about it. All it takes is a strong north to northwest wind for about 36 hours, and you can blow all the water out of this area and see what's on the bottom. As you can see in the photos, there's a ton of oysters in here. Those oysters on the bottom provide habitat for crabs, for shrimp, for small fish, and a bunch of invertebrates. This is an extremely productive area. Notice this sand berm behind me that sticks out into the marsh. It's got water on both sides, and it's got cordgrass around the edges. There's different species of plants and animals that use that high spot out in the marsh because it stays dry under almost everything but storm conditions. There's another species that lives in these marshes, and it's called mosquitoes, and they're starting to tear me up. So this is about it for today. I hope everybody's learned a little something, and if nothing else, I hope you understand why it's so important that we take care of these areas. Thanks for joining me today. If you're a teacher and there's something that you'd like us to try to cover for your classes that has to do with coastal and marine resources, drop me a line and we'll see what we can do. And maybe we can give your class a shout out in the next video.